Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Eric Schein. I'm a graduate of the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. It's a military and federal service academy. It's a sister academy to West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy. It requires a congressional appointment nomination to get into. And I come out of Kings Point as a naval officer serving on special duty in the United States Merchant Marine. And I'm here to tell you that not only is America under attack economically, not only with the outsourcing and more, the subprime mortgage crisis, the financial woes in the markets. Many are saying, I think Lou Dobbs is one who's trying to say that we're not headed for a depression, but they're not looking at the underlying issues and what's going on, or they're trying to act like Ken Lay when he was in the midst of destroying Enron and setting up a bunch of racketeering scandals. He was reaching for the doorknob, backing up, trying to exit stage right, telling everybody to continue to buy Enron stock, telling the board to continue to buy Enron stock, that everything was fine, as he was selling the stock himself. And that is, to a large degree, what is going on here in the United States, that we need to realize that this is the very same type of behavior, and that war, whether it's the war in Iraq and or Afghanistan, or whether it was Vietnam or Korea or World War II or World War I or the Spanish-American War, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, war is used not as a great equalizer, as many, Marx and Lenin and even Adolf Hitler believed that war was the great equalizer that would put kings and queens as equals, as men in arms, carrying weapons in war along with the common folk. And that is not what happens in war. The kings and queens and their heir apparents, or the privileged, they find ways to work for corporations back at home, to work for the military-industrial complex, to get the primo, quote-unquote, jobs and not end up on the front lines. Even in Germany and Russia, one of the things, if you messed up, you'd end up on the Eastern Front. And that is the type of behavior to where it is used as a system of social engineering, not only to create enormous family dynasties who are all interconnected to these royal families, but to attack the public, to strengthen and reinforce these individuals of the royal families who act and function as our shadow government. And this includes the Vatican. I'm a former Roman Catholic, went to Catholic grade school and high school, but I see that, even if you go to Wikipedia, that Rome is an absolute monarch. He is elected by the cardinals. We have nothing to say, or very little to say, in what goes on in the Catholic Church, and it is more or less a corporation. When you start to look at and analyze many of the things of the Catholic Church and what is going on in the world, similar to just how the Vatican is a nation state unto itself in the middle of Italy, as is Washington, D.C., a nation state more or less unto itself in the middle of the United States, the parallels go well beyond this. The thing I wanted to talk about, though, today in this episode, Volume 2, today is October 30th, 2008. The first show was about Germania, Germany, Greater Germania, and all of the countries that make up and or made up Germany in the past and do make it up today, and the royal families like the Habsburgs. But I want to talk about military tribunals where the United States, or the powers that be that are in control right now, including the Bush family, Bush dynasty, House of Bush, that is connected to House of Saud and House of Habsburg, and House of Morgan, which are all royal family houses. Anheuser-Busch, as married into, Cindy McCain to John McCain. The use of military tribunals are being used not only in Guantanamo Bay and in Iraq and in other countries around the world, but they are now being used here in the United States, in a free republic, against our own citizens. Posse Comitatus has effectively been suspended, even though it's part of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and has been crafted into it, along with Supreme Court case precedents like Reed versus Covert from 1957, barring the use of military assets against our own citizens and civilians. But what is going on, and this has happened in Vietnam, it happened in the first Gulf War, it happened in Vietnam, Korea, World War II, World War I, it happened in Hawaii in World War II, and Duke Kahanamoku, there's a famous Supreme Court case precedence where the military after Pearl Harbor imposed military tribunals upon the Hawaiians, and this was taken to the Supreme Court. The same thing happened in the case of Reed versus Covert from 1957, and now they are trying it through another means, the Coast Guard under Admiralty, to where the Coast Guard has converted itself into a full-time branch of military, not within the Department of Defense, not under the Department of Navy, but within Homeland Security, operating under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and Military Law, or Title 10, and carrying on trying to adjudicate and or administrate civil service civilian law, like the Administrative Procedure Act that was passed at the same time as the UCMJ in 1946, 1947, but they are doing it under not a civil service or civilian structure. They're doing it from within a special branch of military, the Coast Guard, under Admiral Allen, the head, the military head of this, special branch of military and Homeland Security now, but also carrying on and administering civil service law or civilian law in the Administrative Procedure Act under the JAG Council, Judge Advocate General, Military Uniformed Council, as prosecutors of alleged civilians. And I know of this because they have had and held me within these proceedings for the last 5 years, and you won't believe what they've charged me with. The Coast Guard is trying to carry on a summary, general, or special court-martial and or medical board as if I am in the Coast Guard, which I am not. I'm a naval officer serving on special duty in the United States Merchant Marine. I went to a separate and distinct federal and military service academy. The Coast Guard Academy is not a military academy. It is a federal police maritime academy. And what the Coast Guard is doing, it would be bad enough if the police, as in the Coast Guard, were carrying on its own trials as a branch of police, federal police or otherwise, but it is now a branch of military, which makes what it is doing in these trials or tribunals or commissions, it's like having a police officer sit as a judge over an individual to either gather information, gather testimony, force an individual against their constitutional rights and civil rights to testify and give evidence against themselves. This has been going on for 5 years in my own situation. They have used untold assets and resources of a branch of military, and there is no difference between taking a tank or a rifle or a rocket or a laser or any other type of a military asset and targeting a civilian because they're alleging that I'm a civilian. I'm declaring and saying that, look, I am and have been a naval officer, a federal maritime officer, a graduate of a military academy. Throughout these proceedings, the Coast Guard went as far as to send an email and contact the United States Navy and tell the United States Navy to discharge me as a naval officer after they brought charges against me so that I would not have JAG counsel and could not somehow defend myself against the full force and effect of the legal department of a branch of military who has been prosecuting me for the last 5 years. There are documents online, transcripts from not only August 26th and 27th of 2003, but also September 23rd, or no, I'm sorry, it's October 23rd from 2007, and May 20th to May 23rd, 2008, which was the actual 4-day trial of me, where the Coast Guard is alleging and charging me and prosecuting me aggressively, and doing so for the last 5 years at taxpayer expense for quote unquote being depressed. And Lou Dobbs is out there quoting that there will not be a depression. And I guess this would be the Coast Guard's way to somehow prove or to fight against another Great Depression, is to go after and prosecute anyone who they allege may be depressed for whatever reason. The Coast Guard has got into the issue of my father dying in the midst of labor disputes with the shipping companies. The Coast Guard has pulled me out of federal district court, where I had gone after the shipping companies and the Federal Officers Association that is owned and controlled by the mob, through the AFL-CIO, through Mike Sacco, who is the head of the Federal Maritime Trades Division of the AFL-CIO, and all the maritime labor unions, where the mafia effectively controls the waterfront, and it does it for these Republicans who are now kingmakers and acting as agents for not only foreign interests, but foreign royal interests. And they are using these military tribunals to go after individuals such as myself, who not only want to protect public interests, public trust, but the United States as a free republic, and any all concerns in that regard, so that we too truly have a free society here in the United States, and that tariffs are imposed upon the foreign royal families from around the world, and globalism and privatization and more are code name for restoring royal family rule throughout the United States, or not just throughout the world, throughout the United Nations, throughout and recreating the United Kingdom, which Australia, New Zealand, Canada, you can go into a ton of countries. Even many of the countries in the Middle East were set up as protectorates and or holdings of England as the United Kingdom, which also included India. Many of the issues of outsourcing and more are targeted at the United States and at American citizens, and especially federal officers and personnel, just like these military tribunals. And what is set to occur is that these military tribunals are set to be extended and expanded upon to include more people, and they are not supposed to be used. These military tribunals are supposed to be used for Coast Guard personnel in uniform, and only to be used by the Coast Guard for Coast Guard uniform personnel, just like the Navy is supposed to use the military tribunals or military commissions for people in uniform of its own branch of service. And this is one reason why the military tribunals, not only in Guantanamo, many of the ones that they tried to set up in Iraq, are having enormous problems, because they're not only unconstitutional, but they violate international law, including the Geneva Conventions that President Bush and others have been attacking. There's two good pieces of I guess essays on this. One has been put out by Amnesty International, and it goes into military tribunals, and I believe part of the title is "Justice Delayed is Justice Denied." It has taken me 5 years from the charges being brought against me on March 6, 2003 until May 20th to the 23rd, 2008, to finally get into a hearing and have a quote-unquote trial under a branch of military that carried on its trial in a backroom at the federal building or fusion centers in Long Beach, California. These trials or tribunals need to be stopped. And I ask for your help in exposing what the Coast Guard is up to. And the Coast Guard is actually answering to President Bush in this. There is no Secretary of the Coast Guard in Homeland Security, like the Secretary of Navy within DOD for the Navy, who answers to the Secretary of Defense. They're trying to set up the very same structure within Homeland Security that is in the Department of Defense, but to have it owned and controlled under military law to rule over civilians. And that is as unconstitutional as you can get. And whether it's a war on terror or whatever other claim or whatever other foreign boogeyman there may be, when we drafted our Constitution and most importantly our Declaration of Independence, we were in the midst of and facing the United Kingdom. And we did not, the constitutional principles that were framed within our Declaration of Independence and Constitution and Bill of Rights were to be enforced in a time of peace as well as in a time of war. And in the case precedents from the Supreme Court in Reed versus Covert, they went all the way back to the Magna Carta, in the controlling opinion by Justice Hugo Black, I believe, the Supreme Court Justice. And they went back to the Magna Carta and laid out why the military shall never be in control of civilians, and the civilians will always be in control of the military. And there will not be, even back then in the 50s, because we had airplanes, mass transit, automobiles, trucks, buses, boats, and more, that we could get an individual to a civil court in a very expeditious manner and get them to a real Article 3 court and part of the independent judiciary, where we would not have a system of competing courts within Article 2 and underneath the executive branch that would somehow compete with the Article 3 courts. And what they are doing is not only turning the Constitution on its head with these military tribunals, military commissions, but they are also, by putting civilians under military authority and prosecuting them for quote-unquote civilian infractions, but as administered by a branch of military, by uniformed personnel in a branch of military. The judge is even a lieutenant commander in the Coast Guard, retired or active duty, and if he's retired, he's still building upon his pension in federal service and is a active duty member of the Coast Guard, even as the judge, whether it be civil service or not. He still works for the Coast Guard. So you have the lawmaking or legislative capacity within the Coast Guard. They're making up all the rules. They're establishing and building the court, not Congress. They have the executive powers of enforcement, and they're carrying on their own trials. And if you look at there's also another article out by Yale law professor Lawrence Tribe, and it gets into the issues, I think it was waging war, trying the military tribunals. If you look at and read both of these pieces, the one by Amnesty International as well, it goes into and argues against, as does the opinion in Reed versus Covert from 1957, as put forth by the Supreme Court, why we must not ever have military commissions, military tribunals of American civilians here in the United States, and that if the bar is set that for murder or some type of an infamous crime, you cannot be tried within a military tribunal, especially as a civilian, and they should not even be trying members of the branch of military. It's a conflict of interest that they cannot, because the bar is set so very high, that they cannot get at lesser issues of fines, fees, penalties, and more for civilians for infractions of civilian law. In my own situation, the Coast Guard, as a branch of military, is trying to impose its medical staff from a branch of military, the Coast Guard medical officer, a Captain French, who has now left the service. And you got to love the name French, which is also, derivative of a kingdom in the European Union. And you can say that France is somehow some sort of a democracy or republic or parliamentary nation. The shadow government that rules and controls France, just like Germany, Austria, Bavaria, and England clearly, are still royal families. And what they are trying to do is use our system against us, subvert our system from within, attack the constitutional principles, turn them on their head, and create these military tribunals to attack not only individuals like myself, but set precedents that can be used against other individuals as well. The Coast Guard is also now, as a branch of military, not only carrying on military tribunals, it is taxing civilians. It is fining civilians. It is licensing civilians. After the World Trade Center events, where they used commercial airliners not only as the delivery device, but also as the weapon of choice to attack the two World Trade Centers and the Pentagon and a field in Pennsylvania, and other attacks where they have used planes and hijackers. They're using commercial instruments, just like what is going on in the financial markets and or our courts, to attack the American people. And the Air Force did not take over the commercial airline industry. It did not start licensing airline pilots. It did not start fining and putting fees against and collecting fees and taxes from the airline industry and or commercial pilots and or private pilots. But what has effectively happened is in 2003, behind the scenes, when the Coast Guard moved into Homeland Security, they flipped a switch, which was unlawful, improper, not done by Congress, to convert the Coast Guard within Homeland Security into a branch of military and to have it impose itself upon the Transportation Security Administration. Admiral Loy was the former U.S. Coast Guard Commandant. He's now working for Lockheed. He's working on the transportation worker identification cards that Lockheed also owns and controls, and are being imposed upon transportation workers. The issue of the military tribunals, though, military commissions, is so very important and is central to so many other issues, and it is something that these foreign and most importantly royal interests have been trying to use to subvert the Constitution from within, use Article 2 proceedings from the executive branch, administrative, civil, or military proceedings, to impose as many people under military law and control and authority of the military as carried out from under this administration. And this needs to be confronted because it is expanding at an exponential rate, and the Coast Guard is growing in size. And I believe that many of the congressmen and senators do not know or more fully understand what is going on behind the scenes. Admiral Allen, as the current U.S. Coast Guard Commandant, just got an award from the National Defense Industries Association, a 1,365 member association of federal military contractors like General Dynamics. They basically gave him the award, although this is not declared openly, for turning a branch of civil service or a police law enforcement maritime agency into a special branch of military that is dancing between what is civilian and what is military, and turning military assets, military resources, military personnel, military courts in and against and upon American civilians here in the United States, and it must be stopped. This goes to ships' captains, ships' chief engineers on commercial oil tankers, the Exxon Valdez, and this goes to ExxonMobil, which is, of course, involved with the Exxon Valdez. ExxonMobil is a recreation of Standard Oil and Rockefeller, who was an agent for the royal families from England. Royal Dutch Shell is a corporation of the royal families. It is Dutch, it is royal, and it is a shell corporation set up to enrich the royal treasure houses of the Dutch, Germanic, Deutsch families that are involved in carrying on a lot of this here in the United States. And we need to restore the Constitution, fight for these constitutional principles, confront what the Coast Guard is doing and has been up to and the individuals involved, get these issues before the Coast Guard and Marine Transportation Subcommittee and Parent Committee, Science and Transportation Committee, to the various senators and congresspersons who have and are supposed to have oversight on these matters. The Government Accountability Office is looking into this issue, but I do not have a lot of faith talking to many of the individuals at the GAO who will see what is literally going on, because what the GAO wants to do is to basically investigate the use of these military courts, military personnel, military assets, military funds of the Coast Guard as this new special branch of military, just to see if these military courts are working properly. And as an analogy, that's like using a tank against civilians and just trying to see if the tank is well oiled, working, functioning, firing properly, and not getting to the issue of whether this tank should be aimed against as a federal military defense asset against our own civilians here in the United States. Please, I ask you, there are many other videos that are up online on Google, Yahoo, YouTube, and more that I've put up in the zone. There's also a radio program that goes to this. All of this has been done at my own expense. It is not a for-profit venture. Getting into many of these issues, and I ask you to confront the issue of military tribunal. Thank you. My name is Lieutenant Eric Shine. This is October 30th, 2008. The program is in the zone on military tribunals. Peace. Have a good day.
Universal interest occupy our minds today.